He's our moderator for this session, which is titled Successful Startups. We have, again, a variety of speakers of different backgrounds who will share their experiences and expertise in helping you build your companies here, and those who are going abroad, so you understand what it takes. Herman, I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for attending this event. It's going to be a great event. We've got a great panel up here with representing some investors, entrepreneurs, and on the legal counsel side. This panel is successful startup stories. So hopefully we'll have some great stories to share with you about how to become successful in Silicon Valley. The panel members that we have up here work with hundreds of entrepreneurs from throughout the U.S. and other parts of the world. They've also worked with a number of investors based in Silicon Valley and global investors. Immediately to my left, our first panelist is Nathan Wheeler. Nathan is an entrepreneur. He's currently the founder and CEO of Network Optics. He has over 15 years of technology experience. His current focus is on the HD and megapixel IP camera technology. Prior to founding Network Optics, Nathan also served some time in the U.S. Navy. Started another company in Hawaii. He graduated from the Hawaii Pacific University.
Never graduated.
Like other entrepreneurs, he never graduated.
Matter of fact, didn't make it out of second year.
Next to Nathan, we have Mavis Yee. She's a partner with Nixon Peabody. Mavis has also worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, from early stage to seed stage to emerging growth and public companies. Prior to Nixon Peabody, she was an attorney at the Venture Law Group in Cooley. She's represented venture capital firms and early stage startups. Some of her specialties include social gaming, media, internet, software, and semiconductors. Prior to becoming an attorney, Mavis served as a special investigator for the Auditor General of the state of California. She has an undergraduate degree from UC Davis, an MBA from UC Irvine, that's the school that my daughter goes to, and her JD degree from Hastings College.
I never graduated.
You know? She passed the bar. Next to Mavis, we have Gary Wiseman. Gary's involved with some technology in Australia. I know we have some Australians out there. Brisbane Materials Technology is a specialty materials company. The technology for the company was purchased by the University of Queensland, and they've got over $20 million invested in the company. Gary is currently trying to fundraise for some Australian technology in Silicon Valley. He's got some great stories. Prior to Brisbane Materials, Gary was the CEO of ZeroCode. Gary also was the general manager of Intel's optical platform division. He also has some great experience with a large multinational known as Raycam. Gary is also international, has a master's degree from IMD. I wasn't familiar with IMD. It's the International Institute for Management Development in Switzerland. Next to Gary, we have Bill Reichert. Bill is managing partner of Garage Technology Ventures. They're very well known throughout the world. Bill joined Garage in 1998. Bill also has some great operating experience and leadership experience, sits on a number of boards of startups. Some of the boards he's on are K-Stack, White Hat, Clear Fuels, Seafarers, and Thermal Ceramics. Prior to joining Garage, Bill worked with a number of other startups. One of the more well-known is The Learning Company. Bill also worked as an executive for the McKinsey & Company and Brown Brothers Harriman. Bill has a distinguished career and a very a pedigree in education. I guess Harvard and Stanford. Bill is also on the board of the Churchill Club. If you're not familiar with the Churchill Club, it's a civic organization in Silicon Valley. So that's our panel. Oh. I'm sorry. FISO mostly. FISO is with Joldi Innovation Group, a company that provides high-tech innovation capital solutions. I think you'll find a lot of the solutions that he has are very innovative and are perhaps solutions that you haven't considered. Prior to that, FISO was a director of HP's intellectual property organization. His background is really in intellectual property. FISO also worked for Eastman's Kodak camera sensor imaging business. And he led HP's worldwide new business ventures and developed their venture fund. So he's also an investor. And FISO started off at IBM's UK's distributed transaction and processing business. FISO also has an international background. He has a degree in physics from the Imperial College at the University of London and has a master's degree in electronics from Durham University in England. So that's our panel. Hope you have some great questions for them as we get going. And we'd like to try and make this panel as interactive as possible. So let's start off with FISO. FISO, what are some of the keys to successful networking for entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley? If the entrepreneurs from Australia or if the entrepreneurs from New York, what are some of the keys?
Well, it's a pretty big question. What are some of the keys for networking? I mean, from the Australian standpoint, I would say that the amazing thing would be if you can be here, and I've actually met about 4 or 5 people from Australia already, and that's a lot of people. So I think you're doing something right, that you're here. I mean, that's the way to network. I mean, the best way to do it is to be here in person. Right? That's the best way to do it. And so I think making connections, being at places or events like this one, and getting to know people, I think that's probably the most important thing that you can do. But in terms of creating networks, you want to create networks wherever you are. If you're creating networks in your own home geography and expanding them out, knowing people who know people. I'm sure even in your neck of the woods, there might be people that know VCs or know other companies, say in Silicon Valley. So leverage those connections. So basically leverage all of your networks, expand your networks, connect the networks together, and most of all be there in person to get to know people.
How about you, Bill? At Garage, you've got to see hundreds of entrepreneurs.
Close to 100,000. So it's, I think to this particular point, the issue of entrepreneurs from outside of Silicon Valley coming to Silicon Valley to try to plug in. I think the single most important thing you can do when you're doing that is to create the impression that you are indeed here. In other words, you don't want to give the impression that you're just visiting. That, I just flew in from Australia and I'm here for a couple of weeks. I shouldn't have done that.
That was a great English.
But you should not, you don't want to create the impression that you've dropped in to, try to meet some people. You want to create the impression that you are of this community. You are here. And that's the great thing about Silicon Valley, is that we don't know, right? Because everybody's from somewhere else. And so no matter how you speak, how funny your accent, we probably would assume you could be a local, right? So that's the thing, I think that's one of the keys, is make sure when you meet investors, you give them the impression that, oh yeah, we're here. And, the challenge, of course, is at some point you have to tell the truth, right? And so, that's a larger question. If you're fundraising for something that is elsewhere, You got to pick the right investors. You've got to find investors who are going to be willing to invest in something that is elsewhere. But the good news these days is lots and lots and lots of companies, it doesn't matter where the company really is, it can be a global company from wherever it started. So if you have the type of company that can be a global company, no matter where it started, create the impression and try to replicate it in reality that you are here. You're not just busy.
Well, that's a great lead into Gary. Gary, you've got some technology that was established in Australia. You're based here.
Right.
Have you had your team come over here, and what are the challenges that you faced in fundraising?
Yeah, I'm actually going to address the main question because I have an additional point that a lot of people in the audience probably don't appreciate. And so when I say this with great humility because I was a member of this club. So there are actually quite a lot of people in Silicon Valley who are potentially available to help you. And sometimes some of us joke about this. We call ourselves FIPS, so I was one of them. FIP stands for Formerly Important Persons, right? There are lots of people who have either been with large companies and just decided, you know what, I've had 20 years at, pick it, HP, and I want to go do something entrepreneurial, or I've been a VC, and now I want to be on the other side of the table, whatever it might be. In my case, I was with a startup company, was acquired by Intel. I spent a good period of time at Intel, and then I decided, I sold the business, and then I decided, okay, enough, I don't want to stay at Intel. And so I became a FIP, and was actively looking for something interesting to go do. And from the person sitting here's perspective, you can say, well, I'm going to go over to troll the labs at Stanford and try to find something interesting. Well, guess what? Everybody has that idea, and there's a million people of the FIPS who are off at Stanford trying to network with professors. It's much more interesting and harder, and yet potentially more rewarding to find something outside of Silicon Valley and be that person that brings it into Silicon Valley, brings it into the US. So you may think, there's no way I'm ever going to get somebody from Silicon Valley to help me, and I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily true. A little bit of work, a little bit of luck, and finding an anchor person, to help you with whatever it is that you're trying to do, be it fundraising, be it business development, be it finding legal help, whatever. Having a person you can count on and call and help arrange meetings and knows people and networks and stuff like that could be really important in that context.
So how did Brisbane find you?
I was, in my FIP role, I was helping another venture capital company called Southern Cross Venture Partners, which is a unique Australia-US firm. And
It's a great firm.
It is a great firm. It's an outstanding firm. And I was working with one of the partners there, attempting to commercialize some technology coming out of Griffith University in Australia. And we were investigating it, writing a business plan, attempting to negotiate a license. And I was literally in the process of deciding it wasn't going to work for a variety of reasons. When Southern Cross was having some difficulty in one of their other portfolio companies and asked me to step in as the kind of interim CEO. We were not able to, shall we say, completely save the company. We ended up closing it, but through that process I got to know this pair of entrepreneurs in Brisbane, in the University of Queensland. And long story short, we ended up reacquiring the IP and restarting the company. So again, it was networking. In fact, I had met this one partner named Larry Marshall through my days at Intel, and he was running an Intel capital-backed startup company, and he introduced me to John Skull, who's sitting out in the audience, and I got to work with John for a short period of time, and then again got to know the entrepreneurs, and went over to the university and got to know the university people, and that's what happened.
How about you, Mavis? In the transactions that you've worked with, I know you've worked with entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, investors in the U.S. and a number of them in Asia. What have you found that makes them successful when they come to Silicon Valley?
Well, I think the one issue that's related back to networking, and it really is people have to be very proactive. And if there's one thing I can tell you about networking is you have to, take a step out of your comfort zone and basically ask your existing network, hey, I see that you know so-and-so. Can you make an introduction? And that's what I think successful entrepreneurs who are looking for investing, that's what they've done. I know that, for example, our law firm, we have a regular process. We actually have a computer process where people, if they say, hey, I'd like an introduction to one of the VCs back east, we're willing to come into the process. And then we, in our firm, which has over 800 attorneys, will poll our attorneys and say, who has the best contact to this VC? And I think what everyone will agree is when you're networking, if you can get that specific introduction, even if it's someone who knows someone, that's much more powerful than just sending a random business plan to a VC. And I think that taking the extra step to try to get a personalized introduction is what makes it successful.
Great
For
point.
networking. In fact, I'm going to contact all these guys, and I'm going to get connections from them. So, and I don't want to, in this meeting, I think, Bill, you mentioned or Faisal, you mentioned that you've already met people from Australia. This is a great opportunity. Meet them, and maybe you'll have connections that you'll want to meet.
Yeah, I learned early on one of the rules of thumb is every person you meet, ask for 3 more names. And you can do the math, the numbers get pretty big pretty quickly.
Yeah, great rule to remember. Nathan, your company is headquartered in Southern California. It is.
Correct.
Are you fundraising in Silicon Valley, or have you? Or do you just come here for partnerships? And what has made your company successful?
A little bit of funding came from Silicon Valley. We just finished a seed round, or we're just closing out a seed round of funding of $750,000. Not sure how far we're going to take it past there, or if we actually need to. The current projections are such that we could hit profitability with the nice thing running without it, but there's some advantage to entertaining the idea of it. But it's different for me. I mean, every entrepreneur has their story, and I love that you mentioned tapping into your existing network because, I had a network of people who in my business development roles at previous companies, I had helped them make money, or I had made them money, or I had steered them towards a new technology, which they re-platformed their solution on, which has grown their company, and leveraging that and saying, if I can do that for you, then I need you to hear me out on this. And I had actually had about a third of the money raised before I had an executive summary, let alone a business plan or any of that. And part of it had to do with people going, if you're walking away from what you've done, what you've currently got, and you're going off on this wild flyer with, without a net, working without a net, then I got your back. I went in because you did well by me the first time, and then expanding out on that. And that leads to the 3 friends that you had just mentioned where, hey, this is where he's going, and you should talk to him. You should see the new executive summary and the plan, which we actually had. And then once we got there, we also got to a point where, and I'll tell this to anyone who's doing any kind of a software company, which is, don't wait for the money, don't wait for the business plan, just build it. If you stay awake at night knowing that what's in your mind or what you can get out onto a computer screen is going to help some people or change some people, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Just go and start building it. And as that happens, as you get there, as you get it even closer, even if it's just something that, it's the start of an idea that can appear on the screen, then at least people can see a direction. People can get a look into the vision of where you're going. And in correction to the beginning, you mentioned I was focused on cameras, megapixel IP cameras, but from my background, I came from the surveillance industry dealing with high definition, IP-enabled cameras, but as these are flooding the market and the end user is upsetting this entire industry by saying, we want this and we want this now, the softwares and the solutions for managing them and joining to that great enterprise are simply not there. And that was the problem we decided it was time to address. Because it's not just surveillance, it's also, I hold up my Droid phone, people see a phone, some people see a computer, I see a network-enabled high-definition imaging device. It's just me.
Well, how many of our audience out there are trying to fundraise and are startups that want to raise money? Well, let's talk a little bit about the fundraising market. And Silicon Valley, we perhaps have the most developed fundraising market in the world. We have so many different types of investors. And Bill, I'm sure at Garage, you're an early stage or a seed stage investor, but you've also worked with some later stage venture funds, probably some private equity funds, and a lot of angels and angel groups. What are your current thoughts on the fundraising market?
Yes, well, the good news is that many of our early stage companies grew up and became late stage companies, and even beyond. And one of our recent enthusiasms is we were the first investors in Pandora Media, and so Pandora went public earlier this summer, and it's a great example of an 11-year overnight success. So it took a long time, and so the characteristic, the challenge for Pandora, so the good news, bad news, in answer to your question, Pandora over that 11 years saw 3 or 4 waves of venture cycle in terms of the enthusiasm for the venture market for different parts of the technology market. And so the reality right now today is that this week the venture market and the angel market in particular is very enthusiastic about social, local, mobile gaming, right? And so we have this sort of tremendous enthusiasm, which I would indeed be willing to call a bubble. There's all sorts of debate as should we call this a bubble, right? No, it's not a bubble, it's a boom. Well, okay, but I am highly confident that it is indeed a bubble, that we're seeing way more companies funded that are going to be sustainable in that sector at prices that are not going to return good returns to their investors. So I think eventually that's going to catch up, and we're going to see that crest and collapse, and we'll get some great companies out of it. I mean, the good news is that you're going to get a lot of development happening, a lot of dynamism and action there, and if you can play in that wave and survive, then God bless you, that's great. And our own point of view on that is, please, please, please have something unique, novel, differentiated that you can defend for some sustainable period of time. So, we're willing to play in that space very, very, very carefully if you've got some form of novel technology or some incredible unfair advantage. Now, the rest of the venture world, however, is struggling to various degrees. The other decent sector out there is big data and cloud. And so if you're in that space, there's some very interesting things happening. I think there's a lot of the traditional funds, as distinct from the angels, are interested in putting serious money into sort of the big data cloud space, which is sort of the next generation enterprise software in a lot of ways. A lot of other sectors are having a lot of trouble. Life science is having trouble. Clean tech, had a bubble that has collapsed to some extent. A lot of clean tech companies that were funded that are really struggling now. So, it's kind of a tale of two cities. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times, depending upon which sector you happen to be in.
Great insight. How about you, Mavis? Working in the emerging growth practice at Nixon Peabody and the relationships and transactions that you're working on, what type of investors are you seeing? Are they angels? Are they late-stage venture funds?
Well, I would have to agree with Bill. This is definitely a bubble. That's not how I would characterize it. So for anyone who was around in the late 90s, early 2000s, I have the same feel. It's like, okay, we can support these valuations. But for my social client, my social gaming, social media clients, what I'm actually finding is they are able to sustain themselves with only a seed or angel round, and then they're going off to make profits. And that's the difference between these companies and the more traditional software companies that need more R&D. And so I'll tell my first successful startup story. I had a social gaming company that received a $100,000 grant from Facebook for, this is back when Facebook was just giving out money for companies to create apps for them. That company took that $100,000, created several gigs, which I'm sure, if anyone goes on Facebook, they've seen them. And from that, they took no more money, they became profitable, and they received offers of over $100 million within 2 years. Yeah. So there is still hope out there, but would I say that's very common? No. Would I say, does that to me signify a problem? Absolutely. But I do think for people who are in the social gaming, social networking, look to angels, look to seed, because I know that many of my entrepreneurs in that area don't want to necessarily go get VC money. One, because VC money is hard to get at this time, and two, because they don't want to give up the control. And I think that's another difference between this, industry and prior industries.
Nathan, how about the entrepreneurial perspective?
Well, I was going to throw a little bit on top of that too, because it's a different perspective. First of all, even though I live in Southern California, my family's down there now. I was born at El Camino Hospital right down the street, so you could say the Silicon Valley sort of hard-coded into my DNA. And I grew up in the East Bay, and I've been around this area. It's from a perspective of owning a company, and from watching the Silicon Valley through the late 90s, mid-90s, through the Netscape days and all the way up to here to 16 years later. I've always thought that the magic of the Silicon Valley is not the wild-eyed dreamers with their tech. That's what we just happen to be aggregates around. It's the crazy people who will take a flyer with one of them. Somebody who can see their vision and say, you know what, this has a leg, this has a chance, this could actually give us the ROI, and then bring in the expertise, bring in the help, bring in the assistance of how to monetize, how to actually make it real from this idea you had in your head to this idea you put on the computer screen to this thing that's now running the social network world called Facebook, or where it all starts and how it gets there. To me, it's not that Silicon Valley would be filled with a whole bunch of people who were still in their garage banging out code or inventing some sort of a new material if it wasn't for somebody to actually go, that's a good idea, and we should take that out and give it to the world and sort of fund it. So it's a little bit different perspective.
How are you getting in front of your investors? And was it through a network, people that you worked with before?
The power of demonstration is hard to deny. I mean, you can go with the best business plan and the best PowerPoint presentation in the world, but if it's still vaporware and it's still in this developmental phase, and you don't have something you can show, some structure. So in about May, ours is a full enterprise end-to-end video solution that involves a client and a serving and a cloud layer that work in harmony together. But we took our client side and we de-featured several of the things that make it magical in the cloud and in the full enterprise, and we turned it into a media player, which we just released 2 weeks ago at a big event in San Francisco. And it got great reception. It makes VLC and all these other media players that everyone knows. It's a free media player, anyone can download it. But it's real. It's something that people can play with and interact with and instantly gain and see the value of it and see where this thing could go or what it could enable when they know what's being built behind it and what's designed to connect to it. So if there is some way to find some little feature, I mean, like we never even thought about a media player. We were building this end-to-end enterprise solution. And the idea of just taking one little component of it and turning it into something that had some consumer value or at least some demonstration value where somebody could see where we were going, that I could then demonstrate it and then show the business plan as well as show the structural plan for achieving profitability and where our objectives were as a company. It's worth its weight. Can't emphasize that enough. Business plan and PowerPoint, you can be the best salesperson in the world. And unless you're going to find somebody who sees the vision like you see it, sees the potential, and believes in that your team can execute in what you're selling as this idea, you got to show them. You got to find a way to show them.
Great. Gary, how about as an entrepreneur, how have you been getting in front of investors, and is your legal counsel somebody like a Mavis? Do they make those introductions?
I can't afford legal counsel. I pay on a per hour basis. So.
You do deferred fees.
Those are great inventions. Great inventions.
Well, so I sit up here. I should be sitting out there because I'm in the same position that probably many of you are. I don't have it figured out by any means. So all I can tell you is what I'm doing, and you take it whether it's worth multiple times or not. But so I guess I have a couple points. One is it only takes one person to fund your company, and so it may mean talking to 100 people, and you just simply have to find the one person with whom the story that you have really resonates. Or, second point would be the story that you have as modified through discussions with your investor really resonates. I mean, I have learned a lot.